The waiting room at St. Catherine's smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, the kind that had been sitting on a burner too long. I had been coming to this hospital for 3 years. First for my husband's treatments, then for my own annual checkups after he passed, and I still couldn't get used to the fluorescent lights. They made everyone look a little sick, even the people who weren't. I was 67 years old, sitting alone with a paper cup going cold in my hands, when a woman sat down 2 chairs away from me. She was maybe 45, wearing scrubs under a grey coat, a lanyard with a hospital badge tucked into her pocket. I assumed she worked there. She didn't look at me right away. She looked at her phone, then at the floor, then at her phone again. Then she looked at me. "You're Vivian Ashby's mother," she said. It wasn't a question. I told her yes, I am. I said it the way you say things when you're tired and a little caught off guard, flatly, just confirming a fact. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and pulled out an envelope, plain white. My name written on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. She held it out to me. "She doesn't know I'm doing this," the woman said quietly. "But you need to read it before you go home tonight." I took it. My fingers closed around it before my brain caught up with what was happening. And then she stood up, adjusted her badge lanyard, and walked back through the double doors that led to the east wing. I sat there for a long moment holding that envelope. I thought about calling out to her. I thought about opening it right there in the waiting room. I did neither. I folded it in half and put it in my purse between my insurance card and an old grocery list I kept forgetting to throw away. And then I sat there for another 20 minutes until they called my name, and I went in for my appointment, and I let a doctor I'd seen 4 times tell me my blood pressure was a little high and I should reduce sodium and come back in 6 months. The whole time, all I could think about was that envelope. My name is Corinne. I am 68 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia, the same house my husband Emmett and I bought in 1987 for $82,000, back when the neighborhood was mostly young families, and the magnolia tree in the front yard was half the size it is now. Emmett died 2 years and 4 months ago, pancreatic cancer. It was fast, the way people sometimes say it like that's a mercy, though I'm not sure I ever agreed with them. After he died, I did what a lot of women my age do. I got quiet. I got small. I stopped having opinions about things that didn't directly involve me. My daughter Vivian came by every Sunday for a few months, and then it became every other Sunday, and then it became whenever she could, which was less and less. She lived 40 minutes away in Alpharetta with her husband, a man named Scott, and their 2 kids who were 8 and 11, and always seemed to be somewhere I wasn't. I want to be fair to Vivian. She is my child, and I love her. But I also want to be honest, because that's the only way this story makes any sense. She had changed after she married Scott. He was in commercial real estate. He wore clothes that fit him exactly right. He had opinions about wine and about neighborhoods and about what things were worth, and he said those opinions confidently, the way people do when they've never been wrong in front of anyone who mattered. The first few years they were together, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Vivienne was happy. That was enough. But slowly, and then all at once, things shifted. Vivian started talking about money differently, about assets, about the house in Decatur, my house, Emmett's house, the way people talk about a thing they've already decided belongs to them. It started maybe 8 months after Emmett passed. Vivian brought it up carefully, the way she'd always brought up things she knew I might resist. "Mum," she said, "Scott thinks you should really consider what happens to the house. For tax purposes, for everyone's sake." I told her I wasn't planning on going anywhere soon. She laughed. "Of course not. That's not what I mean. He just thinks it makes sense to put it in a trust." Or there's another option where we're added to the title, which would make things easier if something ever happened. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said I'd think about it. That was the first conversation. Over the following months, there were others, each one a little more specific, a little more urgent. Scott started joining them, calling from a Bluetooth speaker in their car while Vivian drove, explaining things to me in that patient, slightly condescending way of his, as if I were a child who needed to understand why the decision had already been made. "The market's different now, Corinne," he told me once. "A house like yours in Decatur, with the way things are moving, you're sitting on something significant." I knew what I was sitting on. I'd lived in that house for 37 years. That night, after the hospital, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time before I opened the envelope. I made myself eat first, leftover chicken soup I'd made on Sunday. Emmett's recipe, which I'd memorized so well I didn't need the index card anymore, though I still kept it pinned to the inside of the cabinet door. I washed my bowl. I dried it. I put it away. Then I sat back down and I opened the envelope. There were two things inside: a folded piece of paper, handwritten, front and back, and a small USB drive, the kind you get free at a conference and throw in a drawer. I read the letter first. The woman's name was Deborah. She didn't give a last name. She wrote that she was a medical billing specialist at the hospital and that she had a connection to my situation that she couldn't explain fully in writing. She wrote that 6 weeks ago she had overheard a conversation in a parking garage. She had been sitting in her car on her lunch break, parked on the third level, and two people in the next car over had been talking loudly enough that she heard them through her open window. One of those people was my son-in-law. She wrote that she hadn't been sure what to do with what she heard. She said she'd gone back and forth about it. But she'd seen me in the waiting room before. She remembered my face, and when she saw me today, she made a decision. The USB drive, she wrote, contained a recording. She had started recording on her phone when she realized what she was hearing, and she had caught most of it. She ended the letter with, "I don't know your family, but I know what I heard. Whatever you decide to do with this, I hope it helps you." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. Then I went to the drawer where I kept old charging cables and an ancient laptop I used mostly for recipes and video calls with my sister in Cleveland, and I plugged in that USB drive and I listened. The recording was 4 minutes and 22 seconds long. The audio quality wasn't perfect. There was wind noise, a car going by at one point, the low hum of a parking structure, but the voices were clear enough. Scott's voice I recognized immediately. The other voice was a woman's, not Vivienne. Someone I didn't know. They were talking about a quit-claim deed. I knew what that was because Emmett had explained it to me once, years ago when a neighbor was having estate trouble. It transfers property ownership. It bypasses the usual process. Scott was describing how it worked, and the woman, whoever she was asking about timing. "She'll sign it," Scott said. "She trusts Vivian completely. We just need to wait for the right moment. After the next doctor's appointment would be ideal. She gets anxious about her health and she's more compliant." The word landed on me like something cold. Compliant. There was more. They talked about listing price. They talked about the Decatur market and an offer they'd already apparently received, or were anticipating. They talked about splitting something, though I couldn't make out what or how, and at one point the woman laughed, and Scott said something low that I couldn't fully hear, and she said, "She'll never know the difference." I listened to it twice. Then I closed the laptop and I went to the living room and I sat in Emmett's chair and I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I couldn't find it. What I found instead was something colder and very, very still. "I need to tell you something about Emmett." He was a quiet man. He worked for the post office for 31 years. He coached Little League for 12 of those years, even though Vivian had aged out of it by then, just because he loved kids and he loved being useful. He fixed things himself when they broke, the porch steps, the garbage disposal, the screen door that always swelled in summer. He never raised his voice, not once in 40 years, not at me, not at Vivian, not at anyone. But he was not naive. After he was diagnosed, after we knew things were serious, he started having conversations with me that I hadn't expected. He'd bring things up at the kitchen table, or on the back porch, or sometimes in the car when we were driving to one of his appointments. He talked about the house, about the will, about what he wanted for me when he was gone. He had a lawyer, a man he'd found through the post office union, a man named Bernard Okafor. I know the irony of that name now, who had helped Emmett update his and set up certain protections I hadn't fully understood at the time. Emmett had explained it to me patiently, but I was still in the phase of believing he would get better, so I had listened without really listening. After I heard that recording, I went looking for the paperwork. Emmett kept files in a fireproof lockbox in the back of the closet, the kind you can get at Home Depot. I knew where it was. I had always known where it was. I just hadn't opened it since the week after the funeral, when I'd been looking for the life insurance documents. I opened it that night. There was the will. There were the insurance papers. There was a folder labeled in Emmett's handwriting, House. Read this. Inside was a 2-page document I had never seen before. Emmett had apparently had the lawyer draw it up separately, a letter of instruction attached to the will, specifically about the house. It stated clearly that the property at our Decatur address was not to be transferred, sold, or modified without independent legal counsel representing me alone. Not family, not a shared attorney, me independently. Emmett had known. Not specifically about Scott, not about what would happen, but he had known enough to build a wall around me before he left. I sat on the floor of that closet for a long time, holding those papers, and that's when I finally cried. I called my sister the next morning. Her name is Adette. We've called her Det since we were children, and she lives in Cleveland Heights, in a house she's been in almost as long as I've been in mine. She is 3 years older than me and has never once in her life told me what I wanted to hear when the truth was available. I told her everything, the envelope, the woman in the waiting room, the recording, what I'd found in the lockbox. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Corinne, you need a lawyer." I told her I knew that. She said, "Not Scott's kind of lawyer, your kind." I found one through a legal aid referral, a woman who specialized in elder financial exploitation, which is what it is, even when the person doing it is your daughter's husband, even when your daughter might or might not have known the full extent of it. Her name was Gwen. I'm not going to give her last name here because she's still practicing, and I haven't asked her permission. But Gwen was thorough and sharp, and she did not soften things for me, which is exactly what I needed. I met with her on a Wednesday morning at her office on Peachtree Road. I brought the lockbox. I brought my phone with the recording transferred to it. I brought Emmett's letter of instruction. Gwen listened. She read. She asked a few questions. Then she said, "The good news is, your husband protected you better than most people's lawyers protect them." She explained that because of the language in Emmett's documentation, any attempt to transfer the property without independent counsel representing me would be legally challengeable. The quitclaim deed they were planning, if they'd gotten me to sign it in a vulnerable moment, which they'd apparently been strategizing about, could have been voided. "They hadn't moved yet," she said, "which means you're ahead of them." I didn't confront Vivian right away. I know that might surprise some people. I know some people would say they would have called their child that same night, would have demanded answers, would have needed to know immediately whether their daughter was complicit or a victim of her own husband's plans. I wasn't ready, and I had learned at 68 that being ready matters more than being fast. What I did instead was I called my insurance agent and I changed the locks. And I stopped answering Scott's call. He called twice that week, once on a Tuesday, once on a Thursday, about just touching base about the property thing. I let both go to voicemail. His messages were pleasant, casual. He called me Corinne, which he'd started doing only recently. He used to call me Mrs. Ashby. 2 weeks after I met with Gwen, she filed a formal notification with the county that any attempted title transfer on my property required my independent legal representation's sign-off. It became a matter of record, a paper wall. Scott didn't know about any of it yet. I called Vivian on a Saturday afternoon when I knew Scott would be at his son's soccer game. He coached, which is one of those small ironies that I try not to dwell on. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, is everything okay?" I told her I needed to see her, just her. Could she come to Decatur that afternoon? There was a pause. "Is something wrong? Are you sick?" I told her I wasn't sick. I told her we needed to talk. She came. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read Deborah's letter, the same table where Emmett and I had eaten 37 years of meals. I put my phone between us with the recording queued up. I told her I was going to play something and I needed her to listen. I watched her face while she listened. I have spent a lifetime watching my daughter's face. I watched it when she was 3 and trying to decide whether to lie about something. I watched it when she was 16 and heartbroken over a boy whose name I don't even remember now. I watched it across the table at Emmett's memorial, when she held it together better than I did. What I saw when she listened to that recording was not the face of someone hearing something for the first time, but it was also not the face of someone at peace with what she was hearing. It was somewhere in between, like watching someone understand all at once how deep in something they had gotten. When it ended, she put her hands flat on the table. She didn't look at me. "Mom," she said. "Just tell me the truth," I said. "That whatever happens next, I need you to tell me the truth right now." And she did. She hadn't known about the other woman, the voice on the recording. She hadn't known about the offer they'd apparently already been discussing. She had known about the plan to get me to sign the quitclaim deed. She had told herself it was for my benefit, that the money from selling the house would go into an account for me, that Scott was handling it, that it was all above board. She had told herself those things because it was easier than looking directly at what she was participating in, she cried. I let her. And then I told her what Emmett had left, what he'd built into the documents, how far ahead of them he already was, even from the grave. She covered her mouth with her hand. "He knew," she whispered. "It wasn't really a question." "He knew enough," I said. "I am not going to tell you that Vivienne and I are fine now. I don't think fine is the right word for where we are. She left Scott 6 months after that conversation. She's the one who made that choice, not me, and I didn't push her toward it. She and the kids are in a rental in Tucker now, and she calls me more than she used to, and sometimes she comes over for Sunday dinner, and we eat at the kitchen table, and we don't talk about everything, but we talk. What happened with Scott was handled through attorneys. Mine and eventually his. There were no criminal charges. Gwen explained to me that what he'd attempted to do fell into a grey area, and that pursuing it in court would cost me more time and money than the outcome was likely to be worth. I didn't like that, but I accepted it. The house stayed in my name. The deed stayed clean. That was what mattered. I never found out who the woman on the recording was. I don't know if she was a colleague of his or something else. I decided I didn't need to know. I went back to the hospital a month later for a follow-up on my blood pressure. I looked for Deborah. I walked through the East Wing slowly, watching for someone in scrubs with a grey coat, with a lanyard she tucked into her pocket. I didn't see her. I went to the billing department and described her, and they couldn't match her to anyone specific. From my description alone, I left a note at the front desk with my name and phone number and a message that just said, "If a woman named Deborah finds this, thank you. You gave me time." That was everything. I don't know if she ever got it. The magnolia tree in my front yard is blooming again. It does this every spring, big waxy white flowers that fall apart too fast, the petals turning brown at the edges within a day or two. But while they're open, there's something. Emmett used to sit on the front porch and watch them. He said there was something honest about a flower that didn't last, that it didn't pretend. I think about that sometimes. I think about how I spent 2 years after he died getting smaller, quieter, trying not to be a burden to anyone, trying not to take up space. And I think about a woman I don't even know who sat in a parking garage on her lunch break and made a decision that cost her nothing except a few minutes and maybe a little courage. She handed me back something I didn't know I'd lost. I'm still in this house. I'm still at this kitchen table. I still cook from Emmett's index card recipes, even though I have them memorized, because having the card there feels like something. And I am not compliant. Not anymore.